This is Daybreak, and thank you for staying with us. The hashtag on Twitter is Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422. At Citizen TV Kenya, at Ayub Abdikadir, and at Safin_Achieng. Let's now look at the raft of recommendations on in the report by the Presidential Working Party on education reforms. And coming to you, Amos, on this, on the funding for universities and colleges, there's categorization based on those who are vulnerable, extremely needy, and less needy. So the quota of the funding will be dependent on where you fall in terms of this four categorization. I mean, does this address the problems that we have at the moment of the funding question on university goers or learners across universities and higher learning institutions? Is this the antidote?
Thank you so much. I think we are mixing up issues. There is the issue of access to higher education for two purposes. One, what is my interest in terms of seeking for higher education? But secondly, what does the country need in terms of, in terms of its higher education needs? So we seem to be confusing the two. Because the reason why I am looking for university education is mostly out of the private interests. And the private interests are that the certificate or the paper that I get gives me chances to move a step higher. This may not necessarily meet what the interests of the state are, because the interest of the state is to realize the economic growth, therefore provide opportunities that are able to realize growth in terms of prosperity and also distribution of that prosperity. So yes, this one plays a big role in terms of facilitating access, if we are really to implement that funding model, because the people who stand a better chance of moving because of education are the poor, not the rich. If you come from a wealthy family, you have got 2,000 acres, you have got 10,000 acres, a little step forward and you can even employ PhD holders, and they'll be able to ensure that they perpetuate your wealth. But it's a poor person without anything that really must die for education, because it's the only way in which they have an opportunity for them to hawk their brains and therefore get something out of it. So in terms of facilitating access, this is a good model. And whether this is now able to respond to our national needs, I think there are certain issues that also need to be looked at in that broad context before we can call that this is an antidote. And if you look around and see the demand for higher education, yes, it has been growing. You look at the resourcing towards higher education, it has really, really grown. And the current president, His Excellency the President, is somebody who is very passionate about higher education. We saw his reforms that he started when he was in that ministry, and even some of the things that he's right now pushing are some of those ideas that he has, such as the National Open University and such. But then you need to ask yourself, when you have got this resource, how do you appropriate that resource? And then how do you realize the intentions that you have for that resource that you have? So I think for me, the question which even in this report, the Presidential Working Party has just been shy of confronting is the whole issue around where do we place this resource called the education financing for higher education. And the elephant in the house has been the issue of merging. And the most unfortunate part is that the Working Party has not just bailed the cat. It is again transferring that responsibility to other people. And so even if you are to increase funding, but you retain the model of configuration of our universities as they are, whereby you look at one of the appendices where it shows some universities have an average of 12 children per program, others have got 50 students per program. Even if you are to increase even that university funding by another 100%, you still not be able to realize the intentions. So we must still go back to the basic economies of scale. Where do you need to put these resources for you to be able to realize what you want to do? And I'm a little bit afraid sometimes when we make decisions out of fear. And one of the fears that we are making, I think, and throughout even this report you see it, we seem to be again taking a very, very antagonistic view that the private and public must be seen as enemies. And that's the most unfortunate part of some of these conversations. So part of it has to go with, no, we cannot allow private universities to get money. So those are some of the fears sometimes that are driving what we are doing. But we are very, very sincere to look at what is the resource that we have in terms of higher education. We recalibrate that kind of resource. And the Working Party has been bold in an area such as teacher training colleges. What has it told us? It has told us, merge all the teacher training colleges. It becomes one, and and Kamwenja, Machakos, Eregi, and the rest become campuses? Why wouldn't they be bold enough to also tell us, also with the universities, do the same and give us 10 universities and the rest become campuses? Why is it that because there were so many professors, they are very comfortable that those who are not there to defend themselves should be merged, but the rest should be told that, I mean, for us as universities, we are a special breed. We should be left, even if it's possible, we should create more universities until maybe we reach 150 and such. I think there is a question around looking at, yes, you have got this resource, but how do you use it? And I don't think that just the funding model alone is sufficient for us to say that it is panacea to the funding problems.
Okay, yes, yeah. I'll come to you, Professor.
Yes. I want to start from, just before I get to this, there's something Galgalo said, and if we lose track of it, even you will not have those students to fund in the university in some places. Does the report address the inequality in delivery of curriculum in the country? My answer is no. It hasn't.
We are an equal society.
Yes, it hasn't. I'll tell you. He's right. Even up to where we are today, the teacher distribution in the country is a mess.
Skewed.
It is skewed. I have counties in this country who have excess teachers, and I have counties in this country who have a deficit of up to 8,000 going to 10,000. Now, if you don't address that in your report, you are not being sincere. Let me take the issue you had. Is it going to address the inequality in the higher education, the funding model? I'm still not convinced. I haven't been all along this journey. When we were going through this report, even my committee in the validation, I still raised my issues about this. And Abdikadir, I want you to look at this from my perspective. If today, even funding secondary school that gives birth
to university
students, we are not able to achieve equality, and they are not addressing it, I can tell you. So how are you going to achieve it in the university? There's the question he has talked about. If you look at this year's CUSP, there is no uniformity in delivery of a course. Medicine in Nairobi University has its own costs. Kabaraka University has its own cost. JKU has its own cost. And all those things, the basic principle he's telling you is this: how much can an economy accommodate in terms of public university? This is the question nobody's answering here. People are running away from it. We have saturated the place with public university, and yet the economy has no capacity to fund that university. That is why today Egerton has problems of finances. More University has problem of finances. Tell me any university other than Technical University of Mombasa, any public university that is enjoying its balance sheet. Give me one.
Kibabii University is trying.
Yeah, trying. The one is trying. So, all I'm saying is, it's good to do a model. The bigger problem, who manages to ensure that there is credibility and equitable distribution in this model, that's where the problem will be. You will find that the bad manners in this country, you will find that needy becomes the vulnerable. And vulnerable becomes the extremely needy.
Even this categorization of schools, it is not panacea to our problems. Because even where there are day schools, there are also still preferences. We can still remove theoretically, but practically, we will still perpetuate the same if we have the same structure that has not been improved.
It all boils down to the question of implementation and integrity of state officials.
Yes.
And the way...
No, the structure of the Ministry of Education
must be reformed.
Professor Okeyo, as the Vice Chancellor of a university, I mean, looking at this categorization, and you come as the point of first contact with learners in your institution, is this categorization of, for example, the division into vulnerable, extremely needy, needy, and less needy, to address the funding question, the address to the problems that we normally have for learners in higher learning institutions to access education at the universities?
Yes, I think it's an interesting recommendation that has been made. But basically, we need to look at it from the point of what problem is it trying to solve. Where this problem emanated from is when the government declared that the whole university education is going to be free for all the kids who go to university, and that they're going to fund it. And they have tried to fund it in the past. But of course, there have been challenges because there hasn't been enough money, towards that cause. And that is why now they're trying to rationalize so that they reduce the weight or the involvement of the government in funding it. But categorizing it into vulnerable, non-vulnerable, I think is well-intentioned. My question has always been that how do we determine who is vulnerable, who is not vulnerable, who is able to pay? What is the matrix that we're using? We haven't seen that matrix. We are told it is somewhere in the the funding board, but we haven't seen that matrix. But if that matrix is being used, then the challenge will be in the implementation. And we have seen situations in the past where very well-intended policies are crafted, but then during implementation, it goes haywire. So stratifying the funding into, some people receiving 100% who are vulnerable, most vulnerable, and others receiving maybe 50%, and so on and so forth, is very well-intentioned. The devil is going to be in the implementation. Details. And I think that is where the main challenge is going to be.
Before we come to Dr. Galgalo, still on you, Professor Okeyo, and I want to quote a World Bank 2019 report which was titled Improving Higher Education Performance in Kenya, and this was a policy report. It said, and I quote, "It is safe to assume, based on the experience of other countries in the continent with similar characteristics as Kenya, that a large share of government subsidies goes to students from richer family groups than from the lowest socioeconomic groups, and that financing may still be a significant barrier to many needy students. The Kenyan situation is consistent and replete with the extensive international literature showing that the cost of higher education is deterrent for young people from low-income households or families." We already have problems that was identified by not only the World Bank, but also other reports previously. I mean, why does it seem that the policymakers and those who have come up with this report are not paying adequate attention to the already existing gap between the rich and the poor in Kenya, which is very big and needs bridging, even before we come to the context of funding higher learning institutions? I mean, how can we address these bridges at the societal level?
Yes. I think that's a very important issue, that you have raised, and of course the World Bank addressed it in that report. We need to appreciate the fact that, education, the government has declared access to education as, a basic need, which every citizen needs to have access to. And therefore, the government needs to come up with models and actions which can actualize that, and that is what is important. Cost of education is one of the most prohibitive things for kids to go to school, and this comes all the way from the lowest level to the highest level. The cost is very high. So I appreciate the fact that the government is trying to address this issue. However, the way it is addressed will determine whether it is successful or not successful. In terms of looking at the ways they are stratified, so that, as the World Bank says, there's need to rationalize. Are we able to determine which kids are coming, for example, from the needy families? And it goes back to the question that we were addressing earlier. What scale are we weighing these people on? How do we know that a kid is needy, that a kid is not needy? And are we able to determine that, in absolute terms, so that we can be able to tell that this needy kid then goes, gets 100% funding. The other one who is not needy then gets, something like that. Okay. I think that is where the challenge is going to be for the government to be able to achieve this particular intention. Dr.
Galgalo, talk to me about this, because as you have heard the submissions made by Professor Okeyo, Honorable Nabina Bwera, and Amos, even with this categorization that the report has highlighted, into vulnerable, extremely needy, and the less needy, how will the resources be better targeted? Yesterday, the head of state talked about incompetence, and he was not addressing the ordinary Kenyans. He was addressing his cabinet ministers, who sit at the highest decision-making, one of the highest decision-making bodies in the country. And in a country where connections matter than competency, what is the formula, and will there be better targeting, in your view as an educationist, of this categorization and the students that fall in this respective categorization?
Now, before we come to those categorization, about the funding, I just want to give some input. The funding of the universities comes from 4 components. 1 is from the government of Kenya. 2 is university projects that they initiate, income-generating projects. 3 is partners, relationship, probably they write some proposal, and they get some funding from those partners. The 4th one is the student themselves. Now, if you have a very, very minimal number of students who are coming to the university, how do you help this university to grow? In terms of human capital, in terms of investment, in terms of technology and innovation, because back stops with the financing of the universities. And so that is one factor. 2, in education, before you come to implement education system, you look at 5 factors, 5 important factors. 1 is accessibility. Accessibility is depending on how are people taking their children to school. How are the parents taking their children to university?
From the source.
From the source. That is accessibility. Then the second one is, we call it 5S. 5S. So the second one is availability of institutions. Are the schools available within the proximity of these parents or these children? Especially where I come from, the nomadic country. The children cannot access schools because they are not available within their proximity. So the most important thing is availability of the school. And I am sorry to say this, because there are 17 counties in this country which lacks universities. 17 counties. And most of them come from ASAL countries. They are all in ASAL, 17 of them. If you take Baringo, you take West Pokot, you take Marsabit, you take Samburu, you take Isiolo, you take Wajir, you take Mandera. Fortunately, Garissa has. You go to Tana River. You know, there are 17 counties which do not have a university. And we are coming to that to Maja, where you have mentioned. How do you merge what you don't have? You don't have a university, and you are expected to merge the university to minimize the cost. You know, that is one issue. Then the other one is affordability. In any scenario, in any situation, you must consider affordability. Affordability means the cost. The cost. It must be affordability during the course. And then after affordability, you consider now, if the system is conducive and you can afford and you can run with it, is when you can now what we call acceptability. Okay. You accept that university, that the system is okay, and we can go by it, and we can implement to the full, that everybody will benefit. That is why the president said yesterday, I like that term, all-inclusive, equity and all-inclusive. That is the word which really summarized everything. And how do we put inclusivity, as they have said? Let me finish the last one, which is adaptability. You adapt now the system after everybody had accepted that system. It's like now when we are in education system in crisis, everybody sees this task force has been formed, and then eventually you say, now, this is the task force we really like. And we appreciate our matters, our issues, our predicament have been addressed. So you adapt now that system comfortably without any hassle. Now, how do we consider about equity and inclusivity? Meaning, where I studied in India, they have what they call as affirmative action, which we also have. Okay. In the university, before I'm happy professor is here, in the university, there are two categorizations. Those who pass the exam, let's say the grade minimum point is C+, as in Kenya. If those from marginalized communities or a region access within this 70%, is well and good. And then affirmative action comes in, which is 30% to address those affirmative action, through affirmative action of those communities. Now they lower the grade to C plane. And that C plane is now addressing those marginalization areas. And that meaning not only to access the university, they also pay for their school fees or school, and they pay for them at a loan. So they said we exempt them even from paying the school fees in those areas, if our economy is good. Okay. So that meaning we are not addressing those gaps. Up to now, the report is not addressing those gaps. The university professors are here. And they say now, how do we use affirmative action? Section 56 of the Constitution is very clear. It says affirmative action as it has been done. The only person I really liked in my life in the education system are two people who addressed those affirmative action. One was the late President Moi, with the D+ grade, to inform those people from marginalized areas to access teacher training so that they go and give back to their community in terms of human resource. Okay. That was Moi. Then the second one was Amina, who came up and said 17 counties where you have seen even they don't have a university. She came up with affirmative action. Next time I will produce a letter. She sent it to the Kenya National Qualification Authority to implement the same. For we lower the grade to D+ or C- to diploma, and D+ to teachers primary teachers training. Okay. And then it was chartered. That was a good idea to improve equity and also accessibility of these people.
Yes, Amos, I'll come to you, Honorable.
Thanks a lot. I think we need to correct some misnomer and say that I think this discussion around merging has really been misunderstood. Look at banks. I like citing examples because sometimes we look for solutions in this country and make it look like our solutions are so far away, whereas the private sector in this country is already showing pace of how things are supposed to be done. The same failed public policy where things are not happening in our universities. Strathmore is thriving, his university is thriving, that's Management University of Africa. Those of us who are KIM fellows, we went to KIM, it was not a public university, and it still remains the powerful KIM that was. Daystar is thriving, USIU is thriving, Kabarak universities are thriving under the same failed policy regime, if you are going to call that our university policy is a failure. This is what we need to put into context when we refer to merging. And I've started by mentioning that the Presidential Working Party has been categorical that all the teacher training institutions in this country should be merged into the Kenya Teachers Training College. And the existing teacher training colleges should become campuses. There is nothing wrong in you getting a campus in Marsabit or getting a campus in Kakamega or in Busia. What you say that the entire idea of thinking about a whole structure that it has to be dished out in every county, this is not an equitable revenue that we are sharing. Honestly, Universities is not about dishing it out the way you are working, distributing a road. That is not the same thing. So I think why we are saying that the presidential working party is recommending on one side, but failing also to recommend on the other side. Why would it be so bold that because maybe the principals of the teacher training colleges were not members of the task force, therefore they had no space for them to push that idea. And now when it comes to the issue of universities, they are basically shying away. I am drawing my attention to chapter 13 of this report, and which talks about implementation of PWPER recommendations. And I think that for me, this is the master stroke, because the section is specific but also very vague. It says a lot also without saying a lot. What it has done is that it has created what is calling a Ministerial Education Reform Implementation Advisory Committee. The most unfortunate part is that it's telling us that recycle the same people. You are looking out the private sector, you are looking out the religious bodies, you are looking out the civil society organizations, you are looking out development partners. For heaven's sake, we are complaining that the problem we have in this country with our education is because of the structure of the Ministry of Education. It is to blame for why we have these problems. And unfortunately, it's again walking through the back door and again taking over the functions from everyone. Even our ECD, which the national government was unable to implement for 47 years, counties are trying to do something. The ministry has watched as counties are failing to do their part. There is nothing that stopped the Ministry of Education in terms of intervening and supporting counties to develop structures for ECD. Okay, so unfortunately, it has sat and waited for them to fail so that it can take back the functions. Okay, TSC has never failed to pay teachers. Now, the ministry, which is even unable to pay teachers who paid for exams, now is telling us that they should be consulted over everything. For heaven's sake, Ayub, this is what we are saying. Let's have a sober and an objective conversation. We cannot engage in this blame game throughout. Let the ministry take responsibility and accept that it doesn't have the monopoly of ideas. Let us allow as many stakeholders as possible to participate in this process. Yes, that's what we are saying.
Yes. There's something Galgalo said that we must never, as a country, lose track of. That this country has had very good reports. He was very clear, and he even said what happened to Ahiro report, what happened to Fatuma Chege report, we are now here, okay? And Amos was even more categorical and said, look, the same people, the same ministry that was telling Fatuma Chege or Ahiro that we are not ready, they came to Fatuma Chege and said we are ready. Now today they are saying this is not doable. Then there is a problem. What is the problem? What is the problem? The problem is twofold. One, that you start a journey heading to Mombasa. You've decided you want to go to Mombasa. You start a journey. As you walk, the lazy one who is unable to walk calls you back and you start going back. You listen to the fellow. You start going back. Will you reach Mombasa?
Not even Machakos.
Of course, there will be delays.
You won't reach Mombasa. And this is the problem in this thing. I think the Presidential Working Party, when it was about to, in fact, I would want to be very categorical. The extension has undone the report. Because then, the sharks, I call them sharks, must have interfered with the report. Because, as Amos said, without addressing the structural issues of how we manage the Ministry of Education, then we are lying to each other that we'll implement this report successfully. The second problem, which is very critical for us here, is even the attempt by this report to redo the Constitution.
In what sense?
Look at the recommendation
moving functions.
The recommendation on ECD. Yeah. I mean, that is a constitutional infringement.
Overstretching Article 287.
Exactly. And I want to tell you, Abdul Kadir, I have come from a county Before devolution, there was no ECD education in Kakamega where him and me went. There wasn't. It would be in an urban center in Kakamega where the municipality would be running some 2, 3, 4 schools, or in Webuye, but then in the villages, it was good for you. You would have some church running something with some unqualified people and calling it ECD. When the county government took over, they employed qualified teachers. The issue of what they are being paid is neither here nor. Who failed? The national government failed to develop a policy framework to standardize ECD. That does not mean the county governments have failed to deliver ECD education.
Okay, now, Honorable Nabe, you and Amos point out...
Let me just finalize my argument.
Finalize and then I come up. Okay.
Yes, let me finalize. Look at this issue Amos is addressing about, and which he has alluded to. This issue of merger. There's even more serious things there. And I want to say this. I can see the effect of having so many professors and former vice chancellors sitting vice chancellors in that committee.
For public universities, not for private.
Yes. I can see it here in this report. I'll tell you. They say, make all polytechnics technical universities. Recharter technical university. I'm here to understand the logic. University. The word university comes from the word universal.
Universal, not county.
It comes from the word universal. Now, tell me, why are you rechartering Technical University of Mombasa and Technical University of Kenya? Why are you rechartering it? Okay. And you are not saying, then because Nairobi University has been offering a diploma and certificate, then therefore, can we also recharter
it? Now, because they were not there to defend themselves.
Yes. Dr. and Professor, you and Amos point out where the line of responsibility lies.
Yeah.
It's with the national government, and to be specific, the Ministry of Education. And you sound in your submission, to be clear, is that the content of this report wasn't consultative in the sense that the views of key stakeholders, for example, private universities and others, were not taken either or were ignored. This is a ministry that has an allocation of more than $500 billion.
More than that.
It is almost 700 billion.
628 billion.
Yeah. I say it should go to 1 trillion.
What then is the problem? I mean, if we have talked about the structure, if we are talking about the source, the teachers' pupil ratio at the secondary and at the primary level, which informs why we have universities. I mean, and we have a president who is very keen on education. Even yesterday he cited when he served in the docket as the minister for higher learning or higher education. Who then needs to take up responsibility?
Let me tell you, you have asked where is the problem. The problem is in accountability. It's a basic thing. It is in accountability. Now, what are we saying here with Amos? Or what am I saying? What I'm saying here is, if professor here has been running a unit or is adversely, and Kalgalo here has been running another unit very well, why would you be transferring functions that Kalgalo has been running very effectively to professor here, and you have not restructured the way professor runs his systems? That's my problem.
Okay. Yeah. And let me just add to that, the reason why the 2010 Constitution, the 2010 Odhiambo Task Force report, and Professor Selme's report were very categorical, that we have a problem with how the ministry has been designed and how it works.
Okay.
And the people of Kenya were saying that, please, allow these functions to be spread all over, so that maybe we can get some returns out of it. And I can actually confirm that the first ever permanent structure we saw of an ECD in Chekalin is because when he was the chief of staff in the county government and we called some 2 classrooms at Barin Primary School. Let villagers in my village dismiss that. So the fact of the matter is that let's allow where institutions are having challenges, let us strengthen them. And we have no problem even in terms of strengthening what the ministry is doing. But it's not right that the ministry will be asking for more so that it goes again to duplicate the same inefficiencies.
Yes. Is that where the problem is, Prof, from an experience perspective? And for instance, were your input as a key stakeholder or those of private university heads like the one that you do considered, or even do they reflect? Are they reflective in the report that was handed over to the president yesterday? And is the problem the ministry?
Yes, thank you very much, Abdikadir, for that question. I want to say that in terms of representation, yes, private universities are represented in the task force. We have, I think, the deputy chair of the task force, who is a vice chancellor of Catholic University of East Africa. So the representation is there. As to whether it is adequate, that's another matter. But I'm aware that we are represented. Now, the issues that have been raised by the task force are critical issues that need to be looked at. But I agree with the debate from my colleagues here in terms of whether they are the real issues that are facing the education sector, and whether the way they have been recommended is the same way that they need to be addressed. Because there was an attempt to get views from the stakeholders. Was the time adequate? Were all the views collected? Mm-hmm. I think those are the kind of questions that we need to ask and try to get answers to. In terms of private universities, there are recommendations there which perhaps could have been done differently. Yeah. For example, the issue of the private universities' stake, in the whole education system, is is being looked at like the private universities are teaching children of a lesser God.
Yes.
If I may use that terminology.
Close them, basically.
Yes, yeah. They're teaching children of a lesser God, and yet, in our education system, it is the learner who chooses where to go. So the learner, once he chooses to go to private universities, then the government should actually be able to support that child or that student when it goes to the private universities, because that is the choice of the child. But to introduce some sort of discriminatory measure and say that the students who go to private universities are not going to be funded by the government, I think that is discriminatory. Yeah, which we should address. Then the other issue is the entire, these reforms are kind of too frequent, and I'm glad to repeat that there were Fatuba Chege, recommendations. There was the earlier recommendations.
Professor Airo.
Professor Airo. So why are we doing all this every now and then? If you look at the other jurisdictions, you look at the other countries that we can borrow from, the education systems are very stable. Once a particular evaluation is done, that runs for a number of years. And you can only, solve individual problems within that system. But you don't overhaul the entire education system. Overhauling that actually is very expensive, and two, it now redirects the attention from the good intentions that the education is supposed to give, to something else. So we need to look at, for example, looking at the CBC system of education, which is being introduced now. I agree there have been weaknesses in the 844 system of education, but was the total overhaul the real solution to addressing those problems of 844? And debates are there as to whether this was the time to replace 844 with CBC, and whether CBC is really going to solve the problems. Actually, there have been debates that say that CBC is kind of not really going to solve the problems that 844 had. So there needs to be a lot of consideration in this. The presidential working party's recommendations, as I said earlier, it has come out with a book of over 200 pages. A book of over 200 pages. By the time you finish reading the first page and the end, you have forgotten what was in the first.
That's before the appendices.
Exactly.
Would it have been more simpler?
Yeah. a very, very simpler, structured, and summarized, recommendation, which we can look at as, for example, universities and say, yes, this is our role, this is what we need to do.
Okay.
And then that would be, good for us.
Okay, Dr. Galgalo, you had a point. Please proceed.
Yes, thank you very much. One, I just want to correct my brother there, because if you go to a school, primary school or secondary school, quality assurance is entirely based on the Ministry of Education, because it is a quality concern about the education in this country, not TSC. But TSC has taken that role to assess teachers, to assess whatever the ministry does, they also come in. And they said, we have also to assess those quality teachers. So the role is overlapping. So that is why I concur with the recommendation they have made to be removed from TSC. TSC's role entirely, as previously, it was very functional. And even CIC, Commission for Implementing Constitution, wrote to them, and I can produce that letter, and he said, your function is not about the training of teachers. It's not the mandate of the TSC. Training of teachers is not the mandate of the TSC. Secondly, you are not supposed to check also the quality of this and that and that. So it is entirely under the Ministry of Education. So the ministry, the TSC was a big monster. So they come and mangle the Ministry of Education, and he said, no, we must do this. So this recommendation I concur, especially with the quality assurance and what have you. Okay. Secondly, on the same, the Ministry of Education, even if it has taken the role from TSC, is not going to implement that role. Why? For instance, in the Basic Education Act 2013, it is written, National Education Board is to oversee also the County Education Board. It is in line with National Education Board. And those ones are linkages all through from the county for transparency and accountability, but and for accessibility also. So they put it there, National Education Board. The ministry, not legally, but scrubbed verbally. Then the Quality Assurance Council, where I was one time the chair.
Yes.
They scribed verbally, not constitutionally or legally. So they got rid of that. And then today, now, they said it is the Ministry of Education Quality. I don't know what are these things which does not add up.
Yes.
So the role they take, and let me finish candidly. That is one. So some recommendations are up to date. I really concur, especially those roles which were taken by TSC and what have you. Coming to ECD, I was in Isiolo, Marsabit, and Meru. It is the people who ask, because right now, as we are implementing the DCBC and the school feeding program or school meals, it is the mandate of the Ministry of Education to give feeding program to primary school. ECD is under county, and they were not doing anything to feed this ECD. So what do they say? Please kindly accommodate these people also, so that they also eat and drink with these people.
Okay.
So just a minute.
We need to correct.
So
we need to correct something.
Let me finish.
Yeah,
let me finish.
You'll have the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that is actually. Then that is the second one on the same is the quality. If you are checking the quality of primary, you are checking the quality of secondary, and CBC starts from 2, which is inclusive of the system, and you are not checking their quality. How do you check their quality when the county government has the mandate to run with it? So in the recommendation, they said, why don't you have a uniform recommendation whereby the Ministry of Education can check the quality of education from nursery up to the university. Okay. That is the essence of it. Okay. Lastly, let me just finish it. Just one point. If you look about the merger, the University Act, Professor can attest to that one, is Section 26 of the University Act says, all counties must have a university. Must have a university. Act 26 of the University Act says like that. And we are fronting for that one, but on the process, people are, as he said, the recommendation did not address, you can merge at the universities where they have excess, but how do we merge the university which we don't have? And we are grumbling for to have one in our counties or of these 17 countries. So this is the dilemma, and as he said, they were not addressing those gaps. And those are the gaps which the president said, equity and all-inclusive education.
Thank you.
That is my take.
I just want to, yes, I just need to make a correction on this. In my estimation, the terms of reference for the Presidential Working Party were succinct, they were concise. I even wrote about this one and shared as much as possible. For me, the framing of the issues was exceptionally done well. The issues were brought out, the causes, the situational analysis, the level of evidence provided is sufficient. What I have a personal problem with is the framing of the recommendations and where you place the responsibility of implementing those recommendations. That is the first thing. That I just wish to make that correction. Number two, I am a bit uncomfortable when we are a country that seeks to believe that certain sections must be denied for others to benefit. I don't believe in that. And I do not believe that for us getting into a process just to make sure that we lock out certain sections such as the private sector is quite good for this country. And I want to draw this comparison because if somebody sits somewhere and thinks that this report is a panacea to their problems, I think it will be very, very unfortunate. During COVID-19, we expected, and contrary to the public view, there are a lot of private institutions who are going to collapse. But look at after COVID, how the private sector has bounced back, particularly in education, and it is still thriving. Now, we were even told during COVID that the students who went to public schools, even in as much as they did not have technology, they performed better. Today, as we sit here, take any survey and ask the public, where CBC is happening in junior secondary school? Is it in the public schools or is it happening in the private schools? Can you imagine that 1 month to 2 months before schools were opening, we are being told that move the decision from secondary schools to primary schools. And as we speak right now, the public is still not ready. But the private schools basically moved. I can assure somebody that the private sector in this country is very, very resilient. It is therefore very, very dangerous for us to make decisions and recommendations in the view that we have to curtail certain sections for others to progress. And I want Kenyans to remember one man called Professor Harry Kane. He's a professor of chemistry or physics from Moi University, and Professor Laban Airo. They did something very, very fundamentally theoretical about CBC, and were telling us why the structure should be what it should be. I am sitting over here, and my interpretations of Kenyans asking that junior secondary school should remain in primary school was a temporary relief. Kenyans were not saying that let these schools remain in primary schools forever. Are we going to sit here and buy fear that we don't have resources and therefore kill the aspirations of our children? In just 30 seconds, I illustrate why there is something about populism and allowing that the public has cried so much, telling you that let these children remain in primary school, and we go to buy into that one. And Honorable Nabi just asked a very good question. If you are going to Mombasa, and somebody shouts and saying that you are not going to Mombasa, just because you've reached Machakos, are you going to change direction and now start going to Narok? This is the point to put across. There are fundamental, philosophical, theoretical reasons as to why KICD made certain decisions. There are fundamental reasons as to why junior secondary school was called junior secondary school. For the reason being that our current primary school, and Professor Kane did that analysis very well, the utility of our primary school was ending at year 6. After that, we begin losing children because focus now shifts from rather than the development of these children, we now begin focusing on exams. And so the primary schools as currently designed cannot address the physical, the emotional needs of these children. Okay. On the other hand, the secondary schools are not designed to receive small children. They are designed to receive semi-adults. And yet the same secondary schools had not been refined, had actually not been restructured. So the conversation was around, how do we make sure that we create a structure that doesn't allow us to lose out these children who are becoming adolescents? Now, unfortunately, all this has been lost in the name of we are creating a comprehensive school. We are creating, what we are putting across is that let's allow even institutions such as KICD, which have been very, very diligent in terms of doing their work, to also continue doing their work. Okay. Let's not buy into this fear that we are selling to ourselves.
Yes, Abdulkadir,
okay.
I have consistently argued, even on the floor of the House, that we should remove emotions from education.
Exactly.
I have consistently argued. And you can see it. One recommendation that shows emotion was imported. It was imported into the report writing is the one where they say implementation is only vested in the cabinet secretary.
Exactly.
God's sake.
How?
God's sake. This is a multi-sectoral thing.
You lock out everyone.
You vest in the Ministry of Education and the cabinet secretary, you've lost it. Number two, Kalgalo, with due respect, if there is anything in this country that was designed so well, is this constitution.
Yeah.
If you look at Schedule 4, there was no reason at all to want to transfer ECD functions of county government to national government, because the constitution had catered for its role. Under fourth schedule, under the roles of national government, role number 15 is education policy, standards. So all those issues of salary, they need to pay this, they need to have this kind of classroom, nutrition, that is under that. And then it's very clear, curricula. That's the role of national government. Examination. Now the question I'm asking, why are you rewriting the same, but now wanting to infringe on the functions of county government? And yet, the Constitution has given you mandate that as national government, as Ministry of Education, please develop the policy across the value chain.
And you've not done it for 12 years.
You have not done it for 12 years.
Then you come to blame others.
There's no standardized.
There's no standards. You have not developed a standard document. You have not developed standards for a classroom. You have not developed standards for feeding an ECD child. Now you want to take the whole function back yourself. No.
Okay, so Daktari and Professor, I'll come back to you. Let's sample the feedback because we had also engaged our viewers at home and we have more than 15 tweets. So we sample what we can. Here's what's coming up. The hashtag on Twitter was Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. And we thank you for sending in your feedback in relation to this important topic at hand and where we have been talking to stakeholders from the education sector. The first one from Okelo Mwalimu, he says the Presidential Working Party on Education Reform report is a bitter-sweet cocktail. On one hand, it is, if fully implemented, it will lead to the production of an all-round and competent individuals. On the other hand, from face value, it's too elitist, too voluminous, and gives over-ambitious proposals with no clear timelines. Sir Nixon Duguri says, I just hope and pray that the new education arrangement won't compromise the quality of education, that the transition won't be stressful all the way, and that parents or guardians' pockets won't be stressed all the more. Bobatino Wino says the government should have reverted back to the old system of 844 while putting in good infrastructure and implementing CBC at the right time when everything is in place. The just recommended reforms won't bring major changes, according to him. Ole Strongo says the reforms on education sector is welcomed and hope it will also reduce the burden on parents. We also welcome the president's call to the executive to reduce travels abroad, that we do not even see its fruits. And Kosgei 8 says, does changing the name from class to grade or secondary to pathways change the substance of the entity? For instance, if today you call Kapsowek secondary Harvard, would it magically turn it to Ivy League? What foolproof parameter would you use to determine the Engineer Lazaro says new proposed funding model will only divide learners in conflicting categories. Choices have consequences indeed. Government initiating radical changes without public participation and consulting stakeholders and committee of experts. Gode Barasawere says, from the way I look at things, our government is in the scenario of shooting first, then aiming as far as the education sector is concerned. There must be a serious recalibration in the Ministry of Education for better and credible results. And yes, it says Kenya needs practical education where people build robots and stuff, education beyond theory. Brian Chemwa says we need true equality in universities through a comprehensive strategy involving collaboration between government, educational institutions, and various stakeholders in society. Secondly, why are we having acting vice chancellors in some universities for long? And the next one says, if the government can't address classroom teachers' remuneration, this CBC will be another 844. Reverend Koske says on the reduction of subjects from 14 to 9 in the junior secondary schools, a new mode of employing new teachers is also good. However, the minister and government must take full responsibility. God bless to you too. And Brian Wando says, we all agree that the report and the recommendations by the Presidential Working Party on Education Reforms is a very good document with good intentions. The devil is seriously in the vulnerable meter, in caveats, and the intention of the constituency development fund bursaries, but we know the truth on the ground. And the next one says, in a country where people open fictitious public schools for the sole purpose of receiving capitation, the envisaged higher education funding model will only be worse. Kibrut_ says, CBC required proper and timely funding. However, all these resources that are to be deployed should be appropriately used, excluding the PSC and entrusting the Commission on University Education with the university head recruitment can bring positive change. Yes, Daktari, to you, and also your brief final remarks, and then I'll go to Professor. Yes, you had a point, Alex.
Yes. One thing is the president stated very clearly. He said evidence-based issues must be addressed. Evidence-based. Evidence-based is, to me, the way I understood it, was infrastructure development. Those are lacking. Evidence-based, inadequate teachers and training of DCBC. That's inadequate. Then learning and teaching facilities are also inadequate. Then funding of the universities and secondary schools also is inadequate. So he was saying, how do we address these? Those issues must be addressed. That is his commitment. As somebody had put it there, he said, whatever these recommendations have been done, what is the time limit or time frame? How do you operate within that time frame? Where is the time frame and the limit? Where is it? We are not sure of that one. Secondly, somebody said, my friend Amos, is it Amos? Yeah, he said, let's give role of curriculum, KICD, to play their role effectively. For sure, let me be honest. I'm also, I've studied curriculum, and I have a degree in that one. And what did they recommend? It was an able task. It was really in shambles. Let me be honest and say clearly. When I came to a school, a lesson of class 4 and class 6, people are taken for swimming pool for practical lesson. And that is where the problem of content is, that competency. When the teacher himself doesn't know even how to swim. In the second case, even the teacher do not have those, what the swimming means is where there is water. In nomadic counties, we search for this water 40 kilometers to and fro. And then you are told, now, take the class to the swimming pool lesson for practical lesson. And the teacher doesn't have those things. Secondly, on the same content.
As you finish up.
After the lesson, after the lesson, the teacher is told, that is in the book. I saw it. I can show it to you from here. In the book, it is written, after the lesson, the children can take this assignment and download and download this link. Some links don't even function. 2, where do the parents get this link? Some of them do not even have a mobile phone. This is smartphone. Leave alone even this is smartphone.
Thank you.
Even Kabambe, they don't have. Okay. So what I'm saying is, 1, affirmative action must be addressed.
Thank you.
To holistically approach this system so that everybody could access this education. The grading system of teachers training and the universities must be lowered for those pastoralist communities or nomadic counties.
Thank you.
Thirdly, on the same, I'm just giving also my own views for added to that recommendation. Yes. There must be also, instead of having those most vulnerable, how do we measure those ones? As Dr. Mheshimiwa has put, how do we measure those vulnerable?
Thank you.
Unless you go back to their region and come up with those measures that you can address those issues.
Yes, Prof. Final word.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Abdikadir. I think my comment here would be that it's a good thing to relook at the education sector and see how it is performing and historically how it has come up. But then we need to have reasons to make such drastic changes, to the education sector. What I would want to say are just 1 or 2 things. 1, we should not discriminate the Kenyan child. Right now, in these recommendations, it seems like we are discriminating against the Kenyan child, particularly who is going to the private university. It is the Kenyan child whether he lands in public university or he lands in private university. So let the money follow the child where that child prefers to go for education. And we are aware that children and students who go to private universities finish way faster than the ones who go to public universities. Then the second one is that we need to there are too many reforms, should I say, okay? And we have talked about them in the education sector. They act more to bring in confusion than actually to address the problems that are plaguing the education sector. And then number 3 is that CBC is very well intentioned, but if it meets the headwinds in implementation similar to the ones that 844 met, then it is also going to be a problem just as 844, was a problem.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much.
We are 10 minutes past. We will continue with the discussion.
Just 30 seconds. 30 seconds.
We haven't made our final remarks. That would be biased. Abdikadir, that would be biased.
And because we also need to correct something. The implementation matrix. The implementation matrix is actually part of the report. So it is not true that this report does not have an implementation matrix. My final word is, Mr. President, you mean well. We told this to your predecessor. We are in this mess because of the Minister of Education. Don't allow the Minister of Education again to tell you that they are able to do what they were unable to do. They are basically preparing you to make other terms of reference for another task force before 2026. Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, my final remarks is that if we want to get it right in even implementing this report, the reforms in the educational sector, we must refer to Article 10 of our Constitution on national values and principles of governance, and specifically Part 2, which says the national values and principles of governance include patriotism, national unity, sharing, and the devolution of power. And I want to insist on devolution of power, the rule of law, democracy, and another one which I want to insist, participation of the people.
Thank you.
You cannot now, when it reaches to implementation, you remove everybody else and insist that it is only the Cabinet Secretary of Education.
Vested.
Part C of that value says good governance, integrity, transparency, and accountability.
Thank you. Your time is all appreciated.
Thank you.
Amos Kaburu, Chief Consul at Opticam, thanks for your time and company. Honda Navina Bwera is the lawmaker representing Lugari constituency and a member of the National Assembly Education Committee. Professor Washington Okeo, the Vice Chancellor, Management University of Africa, your time is appreciated. And Dr. Chris Galgalo Ali, who is an educationist, thanks for your time and company. This is an ongoing discussion and we'll have you again and again. And again, thanks for watching to you too as well. Up next is Health and Lifestyle with Safina Chieng Oma, and we'll see you on Friday morning here on the broadcast. Good morning.